Okay, so let's begin. So first of all, I'm going to try a few changes this time. I went ahead and created an always on top window for the chat here, rather than trying to have XSplit grab another window on my desktop for the chat. It just appears like it's going to be higher resolution this way. And all right, so let's see. First of all, I need to get into the server. And here we are. All right, so last time we made a mechanism to have a username and password and a simple login. So I think this time the most logical way to proceed would be to actually set up a database to hold real usernames and passwords. And then if we have time, maybe to create a mechanism whereby we can create a new username and password. So first of all, let me go ahead and enlarge this screen, or this terminal window. And let's create a new window here we're going to use for MySQL. So remember that we installed MySQL already. Okay, cool. All right. So when you first start out with MySQL, you have a few databases that come pre-built in MySQL. This database, the MySQL database, has your different MySQL users and such. Later on, we're going to create users for different tasks. That way we can limit what each user is capable of doing. But just for right now, early on in this development process, and since we don't have anything sensitive in the database, we're just going to use root access. That will be temporary. All right, so we're going to create a database here. I need to think of a name for it. I'm just going to call it, I'm going to use this for all user authentication related stuff, so let's just call it users. And now, oops. Let's create a simple table of, yeah, we might as well just call it users, why not? So we're going to have a username and a password. So what do I want my username to be? I think I'm going to make it, let's see, how many characters should I allow a username to be? Let's say 32. And let's say the password, why not, 64. Oops. Okay. That creates my database table. And now, let's insert an entry. Which is the same exact thing as I had in when I had it hard-coded into the code, which it still is. Later, though, we're going to have potentially hundreds or thousands of users in this database, and obviously we're not going to hard-code every one of them into the PHP code. That would be rather silly. So now the next step is to actually go ahead and modify the source code so that we can pull the data directly from the database. So here we go. Right. Actually. Oops. Okay, so let's create a class for all of our database operations. C indent, just so you know, makes it so that whenever I hit enter with a, well, here, I'll demonstrate it to you. If I type class whatever and then I put a brace, because I've done the set C indent, when I hit enter, it's going to put me inside here as opposed to back to the beginning of the line here. Just makes writing the code faster. And also, if I hit enter and then I push a brace, it'll automatically put the brace where it's supposed to go under the class. Just makes it a lot more convenient. And the next thing, in fact, let's just do this real quick. We might as well do it now. Inside your home directory, the Vim Rc file is where you can set things like this permanently. So let's just do this. And that's basically it. Now, what these things do is the first one will set it so that when I'm writing the code, it's going to format my braces and parentheses and such a little easier. And the second two just refer to how large I want my tabs to be, and I like 4 spaces for each tab. Okay, let's go ahead and okay. Oops. Oops. Now notice when I type tab new, it opens it up as a new tab inside of Vim, and it creates the file if it doesn't already exist. So I can say to myself, I want this file to exist, and then create the file afterwards. All right. This is good for now. So there's 2 ways that we can do database operations in MySQL, or in PHP, I mean, with MySQL. We can use PDO or we can use MySQLi. And I think, just for the sake of the ease of it, I think we'll use MySQLi. And it's pretty easy to use here. Let's see. Whenever you have a connection to your database, you're going to want to use the MySQL connect function, or you can also do it in a class form. And here's some examples that, let me just move this over, that show you different ways you can do this. So again, the page you want is just php.net/mysql_connect, and you can see some basic examples here of how to do this. So we're just going to grab this, why not? Except I'm not going to call it link, I'm going to call it this database. This can be localhost. And for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and hardcode everything in here. This is very bad security practice for a million different reasons, but obviously this is early in the development and I'm not especially worried about it right now. Now the truth is, because I'm live streaming this, I chose a password for the database that I wouldn't normally use, but that's just so that you guys can see exactly what's going on here. So let's go ahead and have a very simple operation here. It should do the trick. And just to make sure that everything's actually working right. Yeah, why not? Okay. Ah, right. Really? This is not executing. Why not? Aha, that's why. I haven't actually installed MySQLi using apt-get install. So let's see, I'm going to need to do that. Just so you know, the way that I determine that is... Alright, so here's the thing. Clearly this line of code wasn't even executing, because if it was, I would either see connected to database or could not connect. So I'm originally thinking that I had the syntax right, and it should have presented one of those two. So it was clear to me the PHP script was crashing at that point. Anytime you have something like, let's say here, some command, and then let's say, and you can see that this executed, and you can see that this didn't execute, and this is valid syntax. Now, how do we know it's valid syntax? We can just type this, php-nl%, and it'll search for any syntax errors. And if it says there's no syntax errors and you still have that, the next thing you want to do is you want to check your error log, which is usually var log apache2/error.log. Or, yeah, error.log. That's usually where your log file is. You can change that by modifying the Apache configuration files and even the PHP configuration files, but by default that's where it'll be. So then the last thing is, of course, I can see this PHP fatal error called to undefined function. So that means the function doesn't exist. And if the function doesn't exist, it hasn't been installed. So that's the troubleshooting process I just went through. So here we go. Now I need to find what package contains that function. So I can do that with dpk, let's see, g dash l. No, let's do it this way. App cache search php grep mysql. And that looks like what I need right there. So I'm just going to install it. apt-get install php5 mysql. Now let's see if this works. Okay, what does the error log say now? Do I need to restart Apache maybe? There we go, connected to database. All right, excellent. Which is good. That means that this section of code is executing the section we want. And now we have, we know the rest of this is not executing, but I think, let's revert back to the way we had this a minute ago, just for the fun of it. Everything executed, but I didn't get any output. All right, let's go back. See if we can figure this out. Query is valid. And let's just see how the syntax looks. Right, we have a query. Then we create a result. Oh, of course. I need to make that a while loop. Funny, there's actually a typo here. Is this? Oh, that's a comment. Okay, I was going to say that'd be funny if that was the official PHP documentation. Right. See if that makes any difference. There we go. And now now we can see that it's clearly reading the username and the password. Now there's one other thing. You'll notice that the array that's returned when I do it this way has 2 elements for each field and 2 elements for each value, where I have a numeric index and I have, call it a plain English index. If I only want the plain English version, I can add a flag to this, which would be here, which would be, let's see, is it can't remember what it is off the top of my head. Let me just look it up real quick. MySQL I underscore ASSOC. There we go. And now, and there we go. Now we can see that we're getting the username and the password. Okay, great. So we know that we now have connectivity to our database. We know that we can connect, we know we can run a simple query, and we can get a result. Let's see, how do I want to do this? Remember, I'm going to be having other classes do all of their database operations through this class. So I'm going to be creating a handful of functions here. Let's try this out. Good. Now, what's nice about this, the way that this array is returned, is that if I have more than one entry in the database, it'll be able to return them all. In fact, let's just test that real quick. So now I have two entries in the database, username Carl and username Carl2, and if I run the script, you can see that it can see each of them. Now this last array entry is blank. I'll figure that out later. It's not a big deal right now. Okay. And there's a simple way I can deal with that, I suppose. Good. Okay. Let's have a similar function here for when we want a single row to be returned. Why not? Okay. All right. So here, when I use the single row, you can see that the result of the query is just one array, like so. Okay, so the next thing that's rather obvious here is I don't like echoing to the screen things like connected to database or could not connect. I'd ideally like to see them in some kind of a log file. So the next logical step here would be to create a simple logging class. So let's do that. All right, let's see if this works. Oh, I helped to actually make the directory I told it to use. Now, I have to think in terms of two things here. One is file permissions, and the other is exactly where /logs is pointing to when I'm in this directory. So let's see. And the other thing is that this is actually getting called, so let's make sure of all those things. Okay, that's being called. Now I should be able to get PHP to tell me what the error is here. It could not write to file. Alright, now I can't remember off the top of my head what the specific function that I want here is, so it's writable. There's not a specific. Right, alright. Alright, so let's try a few things here. Okay, good deal. I don't want it to be 777 though. Let's just see here. Oops. There we go. Let's see. Just for the fun of it. Cool. Oops. All right. Okay, so a few important notes here. The first is the owner of this file, in fact, the owner of this whole directory, should be www-data. Now, I used a little trick to just run a whoami command inside the PHP script to see that. And now, for the fun of it, if I even delete that log file, it should recreate it. Let's see if it does. Okay, make sure it's not there. And there we go. Alright, so now we have a logs directory that we know that our PHP scripts can write to. So let's create a function here called log, which we want to have a message. Oops. Okay, so whenever you have a function inside a class, you can use $this arrow, which is, well, I don't want to get into exactly what that is right now, but basically it will allow you to reference the same variable from function to function. So it allows one function to see what the other function can see. It's a little more involved than that. The truth is that this syntax actually comes from C++ and related languages, which would be similar to this. That's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're doing, but just a little aside. It's helpful even when you're doing a language like PHP where you really don't need to know that sort of thing. It's still helpful to understand how it derived. I don't even know if the mechanism that PHP uses in order to make the syntax work is even the same as what C++ does in terms of how they actually make it work behind the scenes. But that's where the concept came from in any case. Alright, so now we can take out all of this, take out this, and now I want the log message to be a little more verbose. I want it to have the time of day, for example. I want there to be some kind of a separation between each element. I'll use just a pipe bar character. And let's do that. Okay, and let's test it out. And there we go. Now, I don't want it to be called test.txt, so let's change that. That way I can keep each event in a log file that pertains to that particular day. And we can see it works fine. Okay, great. I think there's one more thing. I'm accidentally inserting the new line character twice. I don't need to do that. And that should do the trick. Okay, so now I no longer need to use the echo command to do debugging. We're past that point now. So let's just do a search for any echo, and let's just get rid of it. I'll accept that one. And that one, because this relates to what the person is actually going to see, so we're not worried about those. Now the nice thing about the require once function is that if you have a class that is maybe called by another class and you still wanted to have, let's say in this case, access to the logging class, you can use the require once function, which basically says, hey, you know, if you've already required this file, it's okay. Just try again, and if you've already required it, then don't crash. Whereas if you use, let's say, require, I believe the result would be that it might crash because it'll say that you've already required that file. Let's just see if that's true or not. Yeah, it's not true. Apparently requires. Let's just see. Hold on, I think it actually is true. Maybe. No, apparently not. Apparently require isn't strict like that. I think it was at one point. I still use require once. Alright, so now there we go. So this is what I like to see here. The page doesn't contain any debugging information or messages not meant to the end user, and then behind the scenes we have a file that we can be watching real time. That's what the tail-f does. It allows us to watch it real time, and then anytime that I do something, in fact here, let me resize this a little bit so you can see. So watch down here, and if I go back to the page, you can see that I can monitor real time what's going on during the entire process. So there's a lot of reasons you want to do this. If you ever have a bug in your code, the longest process isn't fixing the bug, it's finding the bug. And the more logging you have in place behind the scenes that can tell you exactly the flow of your program, the sooner you'll be able to say, oh, this is the specific class that is failing. Now, here's something else that's really nice about this. Watch this. So I didn't want that. Now, assuming that I did that right, and you can see here that now inside of the log, by putting underscore underscore file, 2 underscores at the end, it actually shows me the specific file that's generating that log message. And I can even have it tell me things like the specific class, the specific function, the specific line in the file, or I can even have multiple log files, some that are more verbose than others, which is what I think I want to do in this case. Well, let's see, how do I want to do that? Okay, so as you can see, it's giving me a lot of useful information here in this log file. Give me 1 second to move this over so you can see it all. Okay, so I can see the exact file, I can see the class, I can see the line number, and so on. That's giving me that particular log message. That's all useful stuff. Now, one thing that I don't want here is I don't want to show all of this in the beginning because I obviously know which directory it's in, so I want to strip that out, which there's a few ways I can do that, but here's what I'm going to do. And there we go. Okay, so we have a basic logging script now. We have a basic database script. Let's go ahead and stop here for now. We went a little less than an hour. I would say we went about maybe 40 minutes. So question time. So whoever has a question, type Q and enter so that I can see you have a question. And if about 30 seconds or so passes without anyone having a question, then we'll go ahead and call it a day. So, all right, anyone have any questions? And of course, once you type Q, just go ahead and type out your question. Okay, chown means change ownership. It allows you to change who owns a particular file. Now, when you have file permissions in Linux, you can basically, how do I want to say this? You can create a lot of different users. There's in fact a specific user that is running MySQL. There's a specific user that's running Apache. There's a specific user that is me when I log into the server. And you do that so that one user can't see what another user can see, and it helps you with security and making sure that you are not exposing content that you don't mean to expose. Now there's two aspects to this. There's chown, which changes ownership, and there's chmod, which changes permissions. The two go hand in hand. Whenever you have a permission, like let's look at the permission 777, that's the most open a file can be. And you generally don't want a file to be 777, especially in a development situation, because then anybody can see it. Now, there are three parts to this number. You have the owner, you have the group, and you have everyone. I believe that's right. I could have group and owner reversed. Let's just confirm that real quick. Yeah, you know what? I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. You have the first number is the owner of the file and what permissions they have. The second is the group, and so you can have a group that has more than one user in it. So you can have, for example, the wheel group, and anyone in the wheel group has administrative access to your machine. So you could set a permission that says anyone in the group can read to the file, write to the file, or execute the file, and you can set that similarly for everyone else. Now, the way that this works is it is octal, which is base 8. And without getting too complicated, here's what you need to know. 7 means read, write, and execute. 6 means read and write. 4 means read only. More or less you can get by with just that. Now if you want to be creative and have something like read only and execute, then you'll need to know octal. But this is really all you'll need to do. So if, for example, I want to set a file so that the owner can read, write, and execute it, but no one else can, not even if they're in the same group, I would do this. I would chmod 700 file, whatever the file happens to be. And when I execute that command, that means that the owner will be able to read, write, and execute, but the group will have a 0, and everyone else will have a 0, and therefore they won't be able to do anything else. Now, if I want to make it where the owner can read, write, and execute, and everyone else can only read it, then I would do something like this, which means the owner can read, write, and execute, the group can read, and everyone else can read, and so on. And you can create all sorts of different combinations. If the file is not going to be executed, and it's really for your eyes only, the logical permission is this, which is what I set the log file to, which is saying that the owner of the log file is able to read it, write to it, and that's it. There's no reason I would ever execute the log file. It's not an executable program. All right, so that's chmod. Now, chown allows you to change who owns the file. Now, When I do chown www-data, I'm saying that this file now belongs to the user www-data. Now, why did I change it to that user? Because that's the user that's running PHP. And the way that I found that out was just by running the whoami command from within PHP, which happened a little earlier on in this presentation. Okay, so let's see. Oh yeah, and I do need to commit all of this to GitHub. Let's make sure I've saved everything. Of course, the MySQL will not be committed to GitHub, so you guys will have to run the MySQL commands that I did on your own. It's fairly straightforward. And here, just for the sake of what I'll do here is I will scroll up and then I'll slowly scroll down so you can see everything that happened inside the database. So this is when I logged into the database. I created a database called users. I typed use users, which means I want to use that database. Then I created the table right here with the create table command. Then I inserted into the table with that command. And then lastly, to demonstrate a few other functions, I inserted another row using this command. And that is how I did all the database operations. So you can go through and pause through that and see how that happens. Okay, so now let's go ahead and commit everything first. Okay, everything is now committed to GitHub. Okay, so let's just briefly talk about why it's 7. So if you are in octal base, then you're going to have the ones place, you're going to have the twos place, and you're going to have, wait, no, hold on a second, am I thinking this right? No, what on earth am I saying? You're going to have the ones place, you're going to have the eights place, and you're going to have the 16s place. So since you basically have 8 total digits, you can have in any given column numbers up to 7. And then at that point, it becomes it becomes 8, which would be written 1, 0 because you're in base 8. That's the idea of octal. Now the reason for that is because if you want to represent a value between 0 and 7, you need 3 bits to do it. And if we're talking in binary here, you have of course the ones place, the twos place, and the fours place. So you see that if we count to 7 in binary, or to 8 I should say, you can see that we can basically set flags. And in this case, we have 3 flags. We have executable, read, and write. So each of these columns corresponds to each of those. So for example, this is read, this is write, and this is executable. I'll just use an X for that. So if you want something that's read-write, it's going to be 4 plus 2, which is 6, and that's why, for example, 600 means you can read and write to the file. That's how the octal permissions works. Everyone understand that, or does anyone need more explanation on that? Or I should just say, if anyone has more questions, just go ahead and type Q. That way we know you have questions. All right, if about 30 seconds pass without anyone typing Q indicating that they have a question, I'll go ahead and call it a day. But if you have a question, feel free to ask. Just type Q so that I know you have a question. Yes, exactly. Read always has a value of 4. And what's nice about using octal is that 6 also contains 4, and so does 7. And so does 5. So whether you write 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, you're going to have the ability to read the file, for example. Now, I'm doing this from the best of my memory in terms of exactly which column is which. I'm pretty sure that I've got this right, but just as a quick disclaimer here, I might have some of the order wrong in terms of group and owner, in terms of read and write, but I'm 99% sure that this is right. So if you really want to be 100% sure, do a little Googling for chmod and octal and permissions and such, and you'll know that you'll have it exactly right. So anyone else have any questions? If so, just type Q. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you for coming. Sorry about the technical hiccups earlier, and I hope everyone enjoyed this session, and I will see you, let's see, today is Monday, so I'll see you tomorrow at the same time. So everyone have a good evening.